Are we going to the theater less often? So I want to give you the most holistic picture. Censorship. Before it reaches our audience, the governments come in. I don't get it. We don't see that kind of innovation happening in cinema. Cinemas are in a unique position. These are experiences that you just can't recreate online. I don't care what Netflix party feature you use, one of my all-time favorite movies. They definitely have a future. Hey, Jaya here. We are talking about the future of the cinema business. So about a month ago, I made a video on streaming services and how all these different companies, whether it's Netflix, Disney Plus, Amazon Prime, Apple TV Plus, HBO, and all the other new services coming out this year, how all of these services are not competing with each other. At least most of them are not, because they are creating different TV shows, different movies, different content. And the benefits they offer, in addition to just the content with their services, are very different. I broke this down in depth in that video. And my point essentially was that we are going to subscribe to multiple services in the next 5 years. So let's say 3 to 5 different services every single month, just like how we subscribe to multiple TV bundles from a cable provider 10 years ago. I see the same thing playing out for streaming. Right now, we'll talk about how cinema is being affected by streaming services. And is it true that just because we have more movies to watch right now at home, are we going to the theater less often? I'm going to break down trends from the last 5 years so you can clearly see how the cinema industry has been evolving and what the future looks like. And everything I talk about is in this book, In Depth, Future of Cinema. This was put together by FunWatch. It's a startup I'm working on. Very graphical, very easy to understand. This would give you a really clear picture on what is going on in cinema. Whether you're a film buff, whether you're someone in the media industry, it's a good read, and it's available for free in the link below. You don't even have to download it. It's right online for you to view. So do check this out right after the video if you want something to refer to. But otherwise, let's get started. So I want to give you the most holistic picture here. We'll start by talking about the business itself. How has cinema revenue been changing over the past few years, depending on the region you're considering? And when I say revenue, I mean box office. Box office is the total amount we spend on tickets. If you add that up globally, you get a global box office. I'm going to talk about how global box office is changing for the past few years. So that's business. Then we come to financing. How do creative people even come together on a project? Where do they receive their funding from? How do they make the movie? That's financing. Once the movie is made, then what? How do you distribute it? So then the distributor comes in. What is the role of a distributor in getting the movie in front of audiences all around the world? And then we'll talk about how before it reaches their audience, the governments come in to do a little censorship. They censor what they should and should not show their people. So what is the effect censorship has on the kind of movies we see in cinemas? That, and then finally, the most important is a few ways that I feel if cinemas innovate and change the way they go about doing their business, they definitely have a future, and they're going to continue to grow. So if you watch the news and specifically business media, you'd often hear of the word disruption. So a certain industry is being disrupted by a new and upcoming player, usually a startup. And in this case, for cinemas is positioned as the traditional business, and streaming is apparently the disruptor. So as streaming kicks in, we're going to go to the cinema less often, is what I keep reading about. Now, little surprise, we had the largest box office last year in 2019. These are just the top 5 movies you're seeing over here. Avengers, Lion King, Frozen, Spider-Man. These are movies that all grossed over $1 billion while they were in theater all around the world. Interestingly, Joker was the first movie that was rated R, so not everyone could view it, but Joker was the first movie to gross over $1 billion. Being a rated movie. If we look at this global box office broken down into some key geographies from 2015 to 19, you'll notice a couple of things. US and Canada have been relatively consistent at about 11.4 billion. So that is what they're bringing in terms of cinema revenue every single year. Interestingly, the number either goes up or down every single year. It's actually alternating every year. If you notice, that's an interesting trend. Europe and Latin America also relatively consistent, but what's the most interesting over here is Asia Pacific. Asia has a huge population, obviously, and also by far the maximum number of theater screens. But also, given the population, there's a lot more room for growth, and they're continuing to invest in multiplexes and single screens throughout the countries. So we would see much more growth here in Asia, and that is going to contribute to the global figures for box office going up. Let's also compare how cinema is doing compared to streaming and discs. So the sale of Blu-ray discs and DVDs, disc streaming and cinemas. If you look at how that is changing from 2015 to 19, again, here you see box office is rising, cinemas revenue is going up. This of course excludes all the revenue they make from snacks and condiments, but this is purely box office revenue compared with how much revenue streaming services are bringing in through their subscription fees, and how much of CD sales are happening all around the world. Disc streaming and cinemas, this is also an interesting trend to look at. Discs are going down in terms of sales, obviously, but it's also a huge number. If you think about it, 10 billion in CD sales is a little shocking to me when there is so much streaming and of course the choice you have to go to the cinemas. It's a little surprising that that's still at 10 billion. Maybe that's because 4K video is still picking up in many parts of the world. So as that becomes more mainstream, streaming should take over that segment. But cinemas are continuing to rise. Just keep that in mind. Also, I just wanted to add that Netflix, in addition to their main subscription business, is also now in the cinema business. It's not that many, but they are just steadily opening a few nice theaters. Primarily in the US. They started with the Old Paris Theater in New York City. They got that in November 2019. And the kind of movies they show over here are mostly Emmy winners or Oscar nominees, like Marriage Story and The Irishman. The Irishman is one of my all-time favorite movies, if you haven't already checked that out. But yeah, they would be showing sort of the movies that they expect to be receiving awards in cinemas, not just to qualify for it, obviously, but also to give users the choice to watch these movies in the cinema, in addition to having it available online at the same time. Netflix is also set to acquire the Egyptian Theater, which is probably the most iconic theater ever. It is in the heart of Hollywood, so we'll see how that plays out probably sometime this year. But think of Netflix's move into cinema exactly like how Apple moved into retail. So Apple still has a lot of online distributors, a lot of authorized dealers, and of course their own online store. But in addition to all of this, when I say Apple retail, what do you think about? You think about the physical stores, the amazing experience you have over there, the great customer service, and just the overall the vibe of the place. That's what you think about when I say the Apple Store, because that is the experience they've created. And now they have an edge over Samsung, Microsoft, and all these other guys who kind of have stores, but not as cool and not as common as the Apple stores, which have become, historic landmarks in different cities. So that definitely adds to their presence and probably increases even online sales. So think of Netflix's move into cinema exactly the same way. Okay, next, financing. How do movies get made? Who pays for it? So if you think about it, studios, even though they're very large, like Disney and Fox, are very different from tech companies like Apple or Microsoft or Google. Even though they might be of relatively the same size, a couple multiple billions, what's the main difference is that Apple, for example, has $250 billion in cash available. Tech companies have a lot of cash that they can readily invest and spend on research or products or expanding market share, whatever it is. But studios don't have that kind of cash readily available, which is why every time they invest in a new movie, they often find different partners to collaborate with and share the risk load with. There was a time that investors and high net individuals used to all flock to Hollywood to go and invest in movies because it was so profitable. And then came Silicon Valley. So now all of them go there to invest in high growth tech startups instead of movies. So obviously budgets have to be spent much more cautiously. So generally speaking, big budgets are given only to cast and crew that kind of have a certain credibility. So a popular actor or a great director, they are the ones that receive the highest budgets, because the budget ultimately is determined by how much the movie can make when it's distributed. So only these guys have the kind of reach to distribute their movies globally, and that's why they get the biggest budgets to make the movies. And there are many ways that producers reduce the cost of production itself while shooting the movie. For example, you could choose a location where governments want to promote film activity. So by shooting over there, you get a certain tax incentive or a grant or subsidy of some sort, which reduce your costs. Or you could, if you're a credible director, you could sell the rights to TV networks to show the movie right after it's out of theaters, or sell the rights to streaming services beforehand, which will reduce your upfront expenditure as well. Movies without known actors or talented directors or credible producers hardly even receive funding for a theatrical release if you want to release in the cinemas. You could receive funding if you just want to release online or you want to sell the rights to TV, but to go for a theatrical release, it usually involves a couple really talented people coming together on a project, which obviously means it is a huge budget. So that means the new players, people who just want to create a film, maybe it's a third or fourth film, they want to work with B or C grade actors and release it in cinemas. That's not that common. Studios want to repeat the same formula that works over and over again with the same cast, the same basic plot, which is why you see so many franchises in the cinema space. Whether it's MCU or Disney's movies, you see so many franchises because it is a formula that works, and studios capitalize on what works instead of experimenting with something new. Which is why streaming services can take on that kind of risk. If you think about it, Stranger Things primarily involves a young cast. Even the people behind the camera are relatively young people who are new to the space and are now given the opportunity to create a show, and that show became, I think, number 2 or 3 in terms of how well it did on Netflix's platform. So we don't see that kind of innovation happening in cinema, and that's because we're not giving enough chances for new talent to come up with new ideas and showcase that on a big screen, because all the larger players already grab the theaters. So as you saw, producing a movie can be really extensive, but just as important, or probably even more so, is distribution. How do you get the movie in front of the audiences that you want to reach? That's where a distributor comes in. So a distributor picks up the movie because they have relationships with cinemas all around the globe. They ship either the physical reel or now digital copies. They send the copies of the movies to all these theaters. They manage whether the theaters are clearly revealing their figures in terms of sales and passing on the revenue back to the distributor. So they are the intermediary that does all this. They are also responsible for 2 other most important things in the success of a film, which is marketing and promotions. They take care of advertising within local geographies, whether it's in a bus stop or in the large screen in hearts of cities. So they take care of marketing and promotions for the movie. So distribution is a huge process, and major studios sometimes do this themselves, but usually most of the other ones go with a dedicated distributor. Even Apple original movies that they're going to be creating, I think it started with The Banker. Banker is a good movie, by the way. The theatrical release was cancelled for some other reason, but check it out either way. All their Apple original movies, they're going to be going with A24 as their distributor. Now, A24 has also released other movies like Moonlight or Lady Bird, Midsommar, all these movies that you might have heard of, because they also have networks of cinemas all around the globe to showcase these films. And these films, by any standard, are not the usual commercial kind, if you noticed, right? So these distributors like A24, Annapurna Pictures, BH Productions, which is dedicated to horror films, all of these distributors are good examples of people who pick up great movies which are not essentially huge productions involving big cast members, nothing like that. These are great, well-made movies that they pick up and distribute globally. These are a few examples, but there are many more distributors who are doing exactly this. So if you've been following the process, even after the movie is produced, it is the distributor's role to get it in front of the audiences. And distributors are generally competing with the larger distribution networks of major studios. So the Disneys, the Foxes, these guys get the maximum number of shows when their movies are released. So the maximum number of screens for their movies, which means there's a lesser number of screens available for the smaller budget movies, which is why many of the smaller budget movies don't even get a solid theatrical release. They just go around film festivals, or these days directly release online. If there was a more level playing field over here, and distributors picked up movies that would do the most well in the box office, as opposed to the most credible studios, there are obviously many flops. If they were to pick just the movie based on how good it is, regardless of where it's coming from, we might see much more choice in the variety of movies available at cinemas for us to view, as opposed to just a few major studios, and every once in a while you have some sort of a boring film. See, the truth is there are a lot of films that are just for critics to view and not really for a mass audience. It's a very, very niche community that might enjoy it, but there are a lot of other films that would definitely benefit from a little more distribution if they were done properly around the world. This is probably my favorite page in the whole book. It shows how major studios capture most of the box office. So you have Disney at 43%, and keep in mind, Disney includes Pixar, Marvel, Lucasfilm, and also they acquired Fox in 2018. So Fox's 8% plus Disney's 43% is 51%, over half of the global box office. The amount we spend in cinemas goes directly to one of Disney's studios, and then 16% for Warner Brothers, 13% for Universal, 12% for Sony Pictures, 5% for Paramount, and 3% for Lionsgate Film. Moving on, censorship. Censorship is when the government, before allowing the public to see a movie in the theater, the government has a certain body through a media authority of some sort, a board that views the movie, usually 4 to 5 different people who judge the movie as a censor board, and rate the movie based on the kind of content it shows, the amount of drug use, the language used, the violence. Based on a few key criteria, they decide how to rate the movie. You rate the movie either as a PG, PG-13, NC-17, G, or R. This is a little different depending on which country, but roughly the same by and large. But what's most interesting over here is that over half of the movies that have released since 1968 have been rated R. And then the remaining, you have about 5,000 movies PG, and another about 5,000 in PG-13, and NC-17 and G are kind of becoming redundant categories. But just keep in mind, over half the movies are rated R. That means over half of the movie have excessive violence, or they have mature content of some sort. I don't get it. Over half of the movies are basically not allowed to be seen by anyone who is not 18 or 21, depending on which country. Censorship is a real barrier for producers trying to reach their target audience, because anything above than a G means that you're restricting the viewers who can watch your film in some way or another. Now, there was a time that censorship made perfect sense. It made perfect sense for the government to come in and just check on the movie itself before showing it to the public, and that was before the internet. That was around the 80s or maybe even 90s, you might say. But now you have the internet. You can access any kind of content you want on your phone, on your laptop, on your TV. So the role of censorship isn't that important anymore. It's actually completely redundant to decide what goes on a big screen when what goes on the internet is completely uncensored, unless you're China. See, studios do not benefit by being labeled as a promoter of excessive violence or something immoral, an idea that's politically incorrect. They do not benefit by being seen as that sort of a studio, because they want to continue creating films that address the largest segment of the population, and to do that you can't possibly have a bad reputation. Just 2 quick examples on how studios are actually perfectly capable of self-regulating and also complying with governments in the case that something's explicitly inappropriate or something like that, they do comply. Let me just give you two examples. One is streaming, one is for cinemas. For streaming, you have Patriot Act by Hassan Minhaj. It's a very popular show. It talks about news. He kind of gives his unique take on it. Very honest guy in front of the camera. I think there are even people attending it. It's not just a scripted thing. There are actual people who attend it, and then it's shown for the rest of the world. It's also there on YouTube. But anyways, an episode of this show, right? He was talking about the government, the Saudi government, and obviously they had a problem with it, and they asked Netflix to take it down. Just that one episode, Netflix complied with it. So the rest of the show is available in Saudi Arabia. Just one of these episodes was taken down because it was clearly making negative remarks about their government, and Netflix complied. They removed it. But they also said that Netflix has a lot of other shows that show a very liberal lifestyle, and all that is fine, right? Netflix will continue to do that, but when governments have a certain problem with it, they do complain. That's one example of streaming. The other one is a movie called The Hunt. The Hunt is by Universal Pictures. It was portraying a lot of gun violence, and after the incidents in Texas, August 2019, which is around the time they started marketing the film for a September release, I think, they decided to put a hold on promoting it. They just shelved the film until I don't know when, and then in February they decided, okay, we'll continue to release it, and then a whole different thing happened with the whole COVID crisis. They had to cancel the theatrical release, and they ended up releasing it only online. But again, my point is that studios will act in their self-interest to ensure that their movies release at the right time and get to the maximum number of people as possible. Okay, now the last part, the part that I've been waiting for, it's actually the most important, which is knowing all of this, knowing exactly how cinema works, how a movie is produced, how it's released, which are the studios most involved, and all these things that we covered. Now I want to give you my take on what exactly the future holds for cinema. Are cinemas going to continue to grow? Well, I actually think it is. If they decide to innovate in a few different ways. They can't do the same thing repeatedly again and again. They're going to have to change a number of things. They're going to have to implement new things. They're going to have to test new ideas, just like how the agile streaming companies are. Cinema companies need to adapt, need to try new things. And I have a couple of different ideas that I think would actually help make cinema much more attractive, even more attractive than it is right now. The most important is the experience. The experience of going to the cinema in the big screen, watching the movie with others. It's a social experience. That is the experience of sitting relaxed and watching a movie. Okay? So cinemas need to understand they are not just showing the movie, it is an experience. It's an experience for you to step out of your home. So people are going to need a bigger reason to step out of their home, and it can't be just plain old seating. I actually foresee that premium seating, premium theaters, premium experiences will become more popular, more variety of food and drinks rather than just plain old popcorn and a bottle of Coke. It's got to be much more than the regular food and drinks. It's got to be much more exciting. Exactly like how Gold Class is today, I think that'll become more accessible to all ranges of cinema and become more of a standard feature where you have this sort of an experience in the cinema hall. Cinemas are also in a unique position to capitalize on live events, meaning premieres, first shows where you invite the cast and crew of a movie, where they sit in the front row and the rest of the audience watches the movie along with the people involved in the movie. Something like that, a red carpet event where you have interviews with the actors. You have some sort of event that follows before and after the movie itself. So physical live events is something that cinemas should do more often. Or they're not even doing it actually. It should be done at a much larger scale, because the point is when you have that kind of an event, you obviously attract press, you attract a lot of social media buzz, so people know that, hey, this is a solid movie when you see that all these actors are in the cinema hall and the cinema is packed. And also one more thing, you command much higher prices when you invite these guests. It's almost double or triple the price for such events usually, and they're usually full. That's the thing, it's usually full. So cinemas should do more of these events, even if it's just once, for once a month, twice a month for certain movies. Just creating that buzz, right, is what's most important, rather than just showing what are the latest movies running on their social media. No theater, from what I see, is doing social media correctly. So one way to do it is to capitalize on what they're good at, which is not being great online, it is being great offline. It is an offline experience. They should make the offline experience more valuable. For those of you who watched my video on AI, you remember how I spoke about skills that will be valuable in the future are not the ones that can be digitized, they are the ones that are intrinsically human. So exactly like that, I feel that cinemas is an offline experience, and offline experiences are going to become much more valuable as people are more consumed in their digital devices. So cinemas must realize that and make the offline experience more attractive, and then showcase that online. That's exactly what they should do. They should take pictures and videos of all the interesting events they have and showcase that online. What about film festivals? How common are film festivals? Obviously you have the big ones like Cannes and the one in Toronto, TIFF, Rain Dance, Sundance, all these different festivals that are held annually, and they showcase some of the best indie independent films from all around the world, and that's great. But what you have to notice is that these festivals are usually 100% full, and there are a lot of people who actually wanted to go but could not go. The point is very clear. They actually have a huge amount of demand. Like film festivals, when they're hosted every now and then in different cities every year, have a huge amount of demand. Today it's possible to build massive communities of film lovers online who like a certain genre or a certain kind of indie film, a certain geography, all these things. It's easier to build a community online because you can just advertise on those platforms right now, and your audience is almost guaranteed. Okay, the number one way that I feel cinemas should be innovating is around their business model, is specifically around their pricing model. If you look at all the major startups today, the companies that have scaled massively over the past 5 to 10 years, they all have one thing in common, and that is a unique pricing model. They have innovated around the pricing model in a way that no other industry player was doing before them. Take Uber as an example. You have a lot of drivers, a supply of drivers, and you have the demand side, which is the users, people who want to just get a ride from A to B, and drivers who are willing to drive them. They call them partners, but okay, partners, drivers, and users. And then you have a pricing mechanism which decides in real time how much you should pay to travel from A to B, depending on how many drivers are available and how many people want to get that ride. So that's an example of dynamic pricing, and cinemas are in a unique position to implement something like this because they haven't forever. For the past 30-40 years, the way you book a ticket and go to the cinema is relatively the same. Apart from the fact that ticketing now moved online, it is practically the same. You have a pricing model where most of the week is some sort of a flat rate, maybe $10, and then Friday becomes maybe 10 or 12, $13, a little bit more, and then Saturday is usually the maximum. Sunday starts to go lower or could be the same, but essentially that's the only model they have. What they can do is implement a dynamic mechanism. They can try to Uberize themselves. So, for example, you have a movie that's not a major movie. It's let's say from a small distributor, a movie that's you're unsure how popular it's going to be. You start releasing showtimes for it, and people go in and start booking for the show, and then you realize, only about 5 of the 50 seats have been booked. And then what you can do as a cinema in real time is reduce the price for the others. So obviously you fill the seats which were previously unsold seats. You now fill it because the price is lower. Or even the other way around, let me say, even the other way around, when you know a theater is getting full and you just don't have other theaters to show the same movie on, what you could do is jack up prices in a way that discriminates people who were not that keen in the movie from coming, and so all the greatest fans are there to watch the movie because of a dynamic pricing model. Now, even if it's not a full dynamic model, why not just try a subscription model? So for a flat subscription fee every month, say $20, $30 every month, I get to watch, I don't know, 3 or 4 or 5 different movies that month, but it's a recurring thing. I have to pay at the end of the month, and then I get to decide how many movies I want to watch. I just walk into the theater, and that's it. Why not have a subscription service? There is actually a service that already did this. It's called MoviePass. What MoviePass did is, regardless of how often you go to the theater, they had a flat fee, and they would give you this MoviePass card, which you use to book tickets from practically all the major theaters, and it was a US only service. What happened is the economics of this service fell apart. It was doing good, no problem, right? The theaters were happy because the people who came, I mean, they were able to attract more people. But also the people who came, they were spending more on snacks and condiments because the ticket was practically free in their head. So they were actually spending more on snacks, which is in most cases about half of a theater's revenue. So MoviePass was going good until, like I said, the economics fell apart when they were acquired by a parent company. And then what happened is, I think they cut their prices by a third or a fourth, 25% or so. And then it didn't really make sense, because for the price of one movie, you could watch 3 or 4 or 5 or how many ever different movies you want every single month, and that didn't make sense. And obviously, as you can guess, they declared bankruptcy earlier last year. So MoviePass's model is actually working, and we should see more cinema chains or even third parties do this around the world. Essentially, cinemas must shift from being just an exclusive place that you have to watch a movie, because it's not an exclusive place anymore. You have a bunch of screens around. It's not like 34 years ago. They must shift from being an exclusive place to watch something to an immersive experience, because there's really nothing like sitting in a movie and watching a comedy movie and laughing with the rest of the viewers. It's really it's the most social experience ever. Or laugh, or just being frightened with everyone else while watching a horror movie. These are experiences that you just can't recreate online. I don't care what Netflix party feature you use, you cannot replicate it online. And it is something that theaters should be capitalizing on. They should rebrand themselves as not just an outlet to watch a movie, but hey, it's more than that. And we're already seeing cinema windows shrink. So what are cinema windows? Cinema windows are how long a movie is in theaters. Usually it's 2 to 4 weeks, 6 weeks in some cases for the larger movies, but it has a fixed window after which it becomes available online. But my point is, why do you even need the window? We're already seeing Netflix completely eliminate the window. We're seeing companies like Universal shrink their window heavily. So right after the movie is done in theater, it is available online to stream within a matter of 2-3 weeks. So we should see the cinema windows shrink further. And let's be completely clear. If you'd like to just watch the movie, yeah, sure, you can watch it at home with your friends and family. But if you want the experience of cinema, then you come to the cinema, but it's the same content. We should make that ultra clear, as opposed to saying, we have a monopoly over this particular movie for the next 3 to 4 weeks, so the cinema is the only place where you get to watch it. That model is dead, it's dying. So cinemas should just make it official and say, okay, the movie is available everywhere, but here's what you're coming to the cinema for. Earlier this year, as COVID-19 started to become more of a crisis and governments started reacting, and theaters obviously were the first businesses to be shut down, Universal, which already had a pile of movies to be released, like Emma, what they did is they started to make the movies available online, completely eliminating the cinema window. So they would make it available online for rent through different distributors like Amazon. So you could rent the movie at the same time that it was supposed to release in theaters. What I think is that even after we're done with this crisis, we are going to be seeing cinema windows shrink, and the same titles will be available either in the theater or at home, depending on how you'd like to view it. Netflix has already tested this model. It seems to be working, and as long as cinemas are innovating around their experience and there is real value in going to the cinema, people are still going to go to it. People are. And also, after we recover from this crisis, I personally believe that people are going to crave for that offline experience. After being locked at home for I don't know how long, people are going to crave for an experience of just stepping out, going to a mall, having a dinner at a restaurant, going for a movie. It is going to become more popular, which is again contrary to what most people think, that people are sitting at home and they're going to subscribe to a bunch of services and streaming is going to boom, which it is. But again, cinema and streaming go hand in hand. See, throughout history, at least for the past 30-40 years, we have been seeing in the news we have been seeing people assume that cinemas are dead. And why are they dead? Because of a couple of new mediums that came along. I'll just give you a recap of a few. In the 1950s, when cable TV was becoming mainstream, people said cinema is dead. Cinema attendance and box office figures actually grew in the 50s. Then in the 70s, we saw more high production value TV shows come out from the likes of HBO and a couple of new studios that sprung up around that time. We saw more well-made TV shows come out in the 70s. And again, the question was, did cinemas die? Cinema attendance and box office actually grew. Then in the 90s, there was the introduction of the VFX, the cassettes, the home video. Again, the question was, did cinema die? No, cinema attendance grew, box office also grew. Now we're in 2020, where streaming has become mainstream. And the question again is, will cinema die? And will cinema attendance and box office continue to grow? We'll see.